We got Jimmy Graham on the New Orleans Saints, a reunion we didn't see coming. We got a lot of offensive weapons to talk about and some tips and updates from training camp. All that right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Vogel, and this program is brought to you by Scott McNair Injury Lawyers. If you've been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, or hurt offshore, Scott McNair handles it all. You can give him a call at 504-500-1111 for a free consultation. They'll always fight for the win. Joining me for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast is former Saints wide receiver Lance Moore. Lance, thank you for hopping on, man. I really appreciate it as always. And we'll start off with something that I know I didn't see coming, and I'm curious from your take, considering you know this guy much better than I would. Jimmy Graham reuniting with the Saints. What was your initial reaction to that news going down?
I was surprised, just like a lot of people, and it's funny to me because I speak to Jimmy, not every day, but you know, I speak to him a little bit, and we've had conversations about different things, and playing football has not been one of them. So I honestly, I knew that he never officially retired, so I guess the door was always open. But I didn't know that he was actively trying to get back to play, and definitely didn't know that he was trying to come back home. So now that he's back, man, I'm excited. I'm excited for him. And like I've been saying all week, like I think it's going to look a little bit different with him, but I still think that there is a very, very unique role that he can play on this offense. And shoot, I mean, there's nothing wrong with adding another very, very dangerous weapon to an already dangerous offense.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned maybe him having some type of role. I'm curious, do you think that probably if we had to, let's say, start speculating about where we could see Jimmy be effective, is it probably where he's made a lot of a killing in terms of the red zone and using that 6'7" frame? Because if there's one thing I know, you look at Derek Carr's history, if there's one flaw, I would say his red zone numbers aren't as good as you'd want them to be relative to other things, right? Great in the play action pass, really good in fourth quarter comeback drives and situations like this. But when it comes to the red zone, when things get narrow and very tight, sometimes you see some throwaways and stuff like that. Do you think maybe we'll see Jimmy Graham be utilized in that variety where, look, he's not going to burn people down the field like he used to and we're accustomed to seeing, but man, he's still 6'7". It's hard to compete with that. There's things that you can't teach. So is that what you'd anticipate in terms of maybe the best possible way to utilize his skill set?
That's exactly where I think that he's going to end up. And that doesn't mean that he's only going to be in when we get into the red zone. I think there's going to be a specific package of plays that he'll have. But once we get in there, especially tight in the red zone, he's still 6'7", and I'm sure he's still pretty athletic. And last time I checked, there aren't any corners in the National Football League that are even close to 6'7". So, I mean, we'd be foolish to not split him out there, throw him a jump ball, score some easy touchdowns for this offense, some easy throws for Derek, and you know, take the pressure off of our offensive line up there and really utilize something that he's been great at his entire career. I think we'd be foolish not to do that. And I really expect to see that as soon as we start getting into the red zone periods here in training camp. I mean, like you start working on that rapport with the quarterback right away. And, you know, like I said, he's great at that. So I would imagine he's going to do a lot of that this year.
Yeah, and I just know Saints fans, even including myself, like if he ends up having a touchdown, let's say early in the season, even week one, let's say, we're all going to be sitting there hoping he kind of dunks on the goalpost. And even if it ends up being slanted, kind of like that Falcons game you guys had years ago, I think we'd all take it. So I want to talk about the offense as a whole, right? Jimmy Graham is a piece added to a really nice roster in terms of on paper. Obviously, we know what Michael Thomas can do when healthy. We know what Alvin does when healthy. But even around, you look at guys like Olave and Shaheed, you hope they take those year two jumps. The Saints hope that Juwan Johnson could take another jump. They've added Foster Moreau. They've added Jamal Williams, a rookie running back, and Kendra Miller. And obviously, I can't forget guys like Taysom Hill who can do it all. When I mention all those guys on paper, it sounds great. For you, Lance, if this all comes together, right, and the Saints are able to maximize the talent that's on the roster, what is the ceiling for an offense like this? Is it top 10? Is it greater than top 10? Just on paper, what are you feeling about this group? And maybe you don't have to give me a specific number, but how confident are you, I'd say, in the skill and the overall talent that this offense has going into the season?
Well, I think top 10 is kind of low. I mean, I don't think that is even good enough. I think top 5 should be the goal for this offense. Now, obviously, there are some very, very potent offenses in this National Football League, especially in 2023. But with the skill group that we have, the offensive line that we have, I was just looking at the roster the other day, and every single starting offensive lineman is either a first or second round pick. I mean, that tells you how important that position is up front, that group, and you add in with the offensive line and the group of skill guys that we have, a quarterback like Derek Carr, right? Like the last couple of years, it's been the question mark. Who's going to be the quarterback? Are our quarterbacks going to be healthy? Are we trying to move a guy that plays tight end to the quarterback position? Now, all those questions are answered. And I'm not saying it's all going to come down to Derek Carr. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of factors in it. Health is first, and that's paramount. Coaching, play calling, potential suspensions. I mean, things that kind of are potentially coming down the line. But if Derek Carr plays like Pro Bowl Derek Carr, this offense is going to be scary. And I don't think there's anybody out there, including those top defenses, that are going to be able to stop us because there are so many weapons. And then we've got the guy pulling the trigger.
Yeah, and I love what you mentioned about the offensive line. Like you said, they invest in that position. And even Eric McCoy, who's the lone second-round pick, he was actually their first pick of that draft since they never first rounder. So that was a really good point there. And speaking of the talent on this offense, at the end of the day, you still need the coaching, like you mentioned, to be on par. And last year, obviously, Saints fans were a little frustrated with Pete Carmichael. And part of it is they thought the offense was, I'd say, maybe too passive, didn't take enough chances. The other half of it would be all these names that we're kind of mentioning on offense right now really weren't playing last year. It was really Jawan, Olave, Shaheed towards the second half of the year, and Alvin, because he didn't have that complimentary piece next to him, it felt like you didn't get to see the best version of number 41. So now that Pete's kind of has, the full array of weapons, he's got a lot of tools that he can use going into this season. You've been around Pete Carmichael. How confident are you that he will be the guy to make sure that this offense is flowing correctly and that Saints fans don't have to worry about another year of saying they're ranked, 19th in yardage? They'll be higher than that. What's the confidence level in a Pete Carmichael who has done it before, but is coming off, let's say a down year, to be fair?
Yeah, I mean, look, I know Pete knows what he's doing. The only 1,000-yard season that I had in my career, he was our offensive coordinator, and that was when Sean was suspended. So he was calling the plays. So, I know he knows what he's doing. And I feel like it's a little bit unfair to judge him totally on last season when there was so many injuries to this offense. And it starts with the quarterback position. Like how it's so hard to be consistent as a play caller when you don't know who's pulling the trigger each week. And then when you have to rotate guys in and out, trying to figure out who gives us the best option to win, it's really, really hard to get in a rhythm. It's hard to kind of change it up week by week if you've got a different guy in there playing quarterback, or we've got, X amount of receivers who are out. I mean, obviously Jarvis missed a lot of time. Mike T missed the whole year pretty much after the first couple of weeks. So it's really, really hard. But that being said, that's an experience that he's gained and will only, I think, make him better come this season. It's not going to be as simple as we're just going to roll the ball out now and play like it's pickup because we have all of our guys back. Like he's going to have a plan, and that plan is going to be, I think it's going to be a really, really good one. Obviously, you've had a long off season to kind of get the feel with the new quarterback, and obviously him and Derek will be on the same page come the season. But I'm expecting this offense to look a lot better, his play calling to feel a lot better to the people who are outside. And I expect to score a lot more points. I expect to have a lot more yards. This should look more symbolic of our previous very successful Saints offenses.
Yeah, and great point about the signal caller position. Having Derek Carr, and the one thing that people can't knock, guy has been extremely durable the last couple of years, so you hope he's there for all 17. And part of what comes with that is obviously pressure, right? A lot of people are going to say, if you had to pick a guy who a lot of the season's riding on, a lot of people probably go with Derek Carr because it's the nature of the position. If I were to say pick a second guy offensively that really needs to come through this year for the Saints to kind of reach that goal, who you may be looking towards? And it doesn't even have to mean, they're being on watch. It's just more so they're that vital to this position group. Who are you kind of looking at offensively in terms of they're on the list of, man, you really need them to step up, or it could get a little dicey?
I mean, I think there's two easy answers. Michael Thomas. I think just having him healthy, he doesn't have to be Michael Thomas from 3 or 4 years ago. I don't think he has to be that guy. But another option, a physical weapon, whereas Shaheed and Olave aren't the biggest physical type receivers. And my second guy is Trevor Penning. I think that the success of this offense doesn't solely rely on him, but being able to hold down, and not just hold down that left tackle position, but be a dominating force over there to protect Derek Carr's blind side, to be able to open run lanes. I mean, that is a position that, I mean, we were spoiled to have really, really good left tackles for a long time. And now hopefully Trevor is going to be that next, stalwart over there at the left side. And I really am looking forward to seeing him healthy, because all the stories last offseason and into training camp is this guy is nasty and he's a mauler, and he's going to be great once he figures it out. So hopefully he's figured it out. And, I think that he's going to be a huge part of the success of this offense.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned Trevor Penning, and it has nothing to do about today's update, although we'll get to that in just a second. I think this is a guy, like you said, it goes back to them investing in the position. He's kind of the successor almost to Armstead in terms of they brought him in. Armstead ends up leaving in free agency, and he's got that unique blend of the size and speed that not a lot of left tackles possess. So you hope he can put it all together. And I think he can, but I think the main concern would be injury-wise and how that goes down, because that's the one thing at the end of the day, it kind of feels like something you can't control. And for him, we find out on Thursday, another foot injury. Granted, it's not considered major, and Dennis Allen even said he could be back on the practice field as soon as tomorrow. And obviously that's what the Saints would love, and get him as many reps as possible. But for you, is that in the back of your mind one of those concerns like, hey, man, if Trevor Penning does go down, all of a sudden the offensive line doesn't look as deep, and then you start to get concerned about, are those 2 years wasted from his rookie contract? So where is that concern when you factor in for Trevor Penning? Is the concern of the injury almost as heightened as the excitement for the potential? How do you kind of balance those two things?
I don't think the concern is too high. I mean, there's clearly some concern. If you've been hurt and had surgery, and then you get hurt again soon thereafter, there's naturally going to be some concern. I'd be more concerned if this happened 3 or 4 weeks from now. But the fact that, we have until almost the middle of September, for him to kind of get it together and be 100% healthy, and maybe it's a situation where they are looking at it like, well, we planned on giving him some days off anyway, just to make sure that he's healthy. Talk to me in a couple of weeks and I'll tell you if my level of concern is higher. But for right now, I'm not too concerned. And then, I mean, as far as the contract goes, I mean, he's a first round pick. We got him for 5 years. So if the first 2 years end up being injury ridden seasons, hopefully the second one is not. There's still a lot more meat on that bone and more opportunity for him to show why he was drafted in the first round.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'll go towards a more, I'd say, encouraging / positive stance here, because I know Saints fans, obviously, I just seen from Twitter today, they're already panicking about Trevor Penning. But like you said, it's way too early for this. One position group that I think the Saints improved tremendously was running back. Not only do you still have Alvin, but you bring in Jamal Williams, who was an 1,000-yard rusher and led the league in rushing touchdowns last year. And then you bring in Kendra Miller from TCU, who I think if this kid stays healthy and gets a chance early to really kind of leave his footprint on this offense, he can make some noise, and Saints fans will quickly embrace him. When you look at this position group, am I crazy to think that there will be some games, and I think the Saints just have to go in with that run-heavy approach, because between those three, you add in what Taysom Hill can do running the football. I love the passing options the Saints have, and I could talk about their wide receiver trio for days. I genuinely love it. But I think there's a capability here, if the O-line's healthy and you got the running backs at your disposal, to really impose your will. And I know Pete Carmichael has shown in the past that if he can, he would love to do that. So when you look at this running back group, how do you assess the Saints team? Do you feel like lean a little run heavy? Do you think it's just the perfect mix of the pass and run? How do you look at it?
Well, I think it'll be the perfect mix, but on the flip side, being able to run the football effectively makes everything else easier. So if that group of guys is healthy and they're all getting reps and they're all getting touches, which I'm going to pump the brakes on the Kendre Miller train real quick, just because the other two are dogs. Like, Alvin Kamara is one of the best in the National Football League. He doesn't have to share carries with anybody. right? Like I don't want people to think like, oh my gosh, this Kendre isn't playing, like he's not capable. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that Alvin Kamara is one of the best in the National Football League, and Jamal Williams is not some backup running back. Like that's not who he is. I mean, he was going into last season. DeAndre Swift gets hurt, and all of a sudden we're talking about Jamal Williams as one of the best in the game. He's over 1,000, and like you said, he had 17 rushing touchdowns last year. So this is not some guy that's going to come in and just spell Alvin. Like he's going to be a heavy part of the offensive game plan every single week. And if Alvin isn't to be there, we have another starting running back in Jamal Williams. So I think that those two guys are excellent players. I think that Kendre, with those two guys, they can bring Kendre on a little bit slower if they need to. I'm sure he's going to get a plenty of touches in the preseason. But once those live bullets start flying, I want my two lead guys in there. And so, obviously there's enough space for three backs. We did it back in the day, several different times with different groups of backs. But yeah, if you can run the football, it makes your job as a play caller, as a quarterback, as an offensive line, and as a pass catcher easier. So I wouldn't be surprised if we went a little bit run heavy, but we got to have success being run heavy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the Alvin thing too, because I see kind of these lists, I see rankings, I see sometimes Madden ratings, and I just look at the Alvin stuff and I'm like, I think they're quick to forget what he can still do. And I think that now that there is more depth around him, maybe there isn't so much pressure to be, he's got to be an elite runner and an elite pass catcher. You kind of let Alvin do the best of both worlds, which when he does that, there's not many like him. So I'm excited to see that. Before I get
but that's something I wanted to mention. Like last year, for whatever reason, they were not able to get him as involved in the passing game as they were in previous years. And that hurts as a rusher. Not being the dual threat, right? When defenses don't have to worry about you catching passes because we're not throwing the ball to you. Every time you're in the game, they're thinking it's a run. So it makes his job as a runner harder. But with Derek Carr, I know he's smart enough to know, man, I just got to get the ball in this guy's hands by any means necessary. So I think that that's going to be a huge part of this offense this season. Like it's going to be like almost like a complete 180 from last season back to the old days of Alvin when he's having, 70, 80, 90 or more catches. And that'll be a huge part of this offense. And that's another thing that Jamal Williams does well too. I mean, he can catch the football and make plays after the catch. So I just want to make sure that was like something that's said, because we're not talking about some 35-year-old running back in Alvin Kamara. Like he's still in his 20s. He's still in the prime of his career. So just because it was a down year catching the football last year, or he wasn't quite as explosive as far as his overall yardage was, I expect to see more of the old Alvin this year as opposed to what we saw last year.
Right. And to use an Aaron Rodgers quote, Alvin's down year per se is a career year for most running backs. So
right.
he's still a great talent. And that's why when people ask me, like, what's my favorite quote of the offseason so far, I go to Derek Carr saying that what Alvin does as a route runner just isn't human, because that tells me that we're probably going to get back to seeing that again. And that's where the Saints are at their best. I can just think about so many times where it's the option route or the wheel route that he was given. He could do some damage. So I'm excited to see that. I want to go maybe a more grand scheme thing here with this entire team. I know we mentioned a plethora of players so far. Is there a guy for you that maybe we haven't talked about, and it could be on the defensive side of the football, could be special teams, whatever, that you feel like is going to play such a crucial role, or someone that you feel like is entering this season where, man, they got to take on a bigger workload, or they're going to make a big impact? Who are you kind of looking at? Because for me personally, I'm coming into the last 2 days of being able to see what Peyton Turner's doing out there. And that's a guy that I look like and say, okay, I'd love to see what he can bring to the table and if he can add to this Saints team. So is there a guy out there for you that you look at the Saints roster and you'd love to see them be an additional impact player, or you think they're going to have a breakout year or take that next step? Who's that guy for you that you're kind of looking at?
Well, yeah, I mean, you obviously kind of, your mind goes to Peyton Turner because he's a guy that like everybody's been waiting on. But I feel like he's not necessarily even going to be a starter. So like he's going to have to earn that. A guy that's going to be a starter that we need to see a lot from, and for him to stay healthy this year, Pete Warner, 100% a guy that's got to take on a huge role. Not to say that DeMario can't still play. We all know he's still balling out there. But at some point, Pete's going to have to be the guy that kind of takes over that linebacker spot and becomes the linebacker of the future for this team. So I'm expecting a lot from him. I mean, we've seen flashes of it. The guy's got a unique ability to separate guys from the football. He can run. He's physical. Just got to stay on the field. And I mean, I think he could be one of the surprises of this defense, if not the whole team.
Yeah, I love that pick. And like you said, for Pete, is he going to be on the field? When he's on the field, he's usually doing a really good job. So before we wrap things up, I want to go into a comment you made earlier this month. You were talking about the Saints, and I've always been a big preacher of July is the time to be optimistic about your football team, particularly when you have a team like the Saints that the roster's in place, the schedule's in place for them to succeed. And you were talking about what the record could be, and you mentioned 12-5 and how that could actually be the low water mark for this Saints team. So I got to ask, like, the confidence level right now, it clearly seems to be towards the higher part of the scale when we go 1 to 10 for you. But where does that confidence come from? Is it the roster? Is it maybe learning from last year's mistakes? I'm sure it could be a mixture of it. But what are the factors for you, Lance, when you look at this Saints team and at the end of the day you go, you know what, I think this could be a 12-5 football team. I could think this team could compete in the NFC. What has led you to that belief, I would say?
Well, I think it's the roster. And the biggest part of that roster is the quarterback. I think it's learning from last season, not just last season, the last couple of seasons, how tough they've been and how much everybody in that building is going to want to get back to the playoffs. And then you add to that what I guess doesn't really matter a whole lot today because nobody's played a single game, but our strength of schedule, I mean, the schedule sets up really, really nice. It's not like we're playing all the best teams in the AFC. It's not like we're playing all the best teams so far or what everybody thinks are going to be the best teams in the NFC. I mean, it sets up really nicely. And then you add the fact that we're not playing a whole bunch of cold games late in the year. I mean, this is setting up really, really nice for this team to be able to go on a nice run. I think 12-5 is optimistic for sure, but I don't think it's far-fetched. I don't think I'm living in fantasy land over here. I mean, I think it's definitely doable. And if this team gels and plays the way that I think that they're capable of with the roster, with the coaching, with the schedule, I mean, we could be the number 1 seed in the NFC. And then everybody's got to come through New Orleans in the playoffs. I'll take our chances there. Like I would like for that to happen, but there's still a lot of ball to be played before that happens.
Of course. And look, I want to say this to kind of further your point. You mentioned the NFC part and you mentioned the record. When I was looking at it before, I have the Saints around that 11-6 ballpark. And even then, I feel like I'm almost adding a loss or two just to say, okay, maybe they're not playing up to their standards. Like the schedule does shake out perfectly. For anyone that will hear, oh, maybe the Saints can be the top team in the NFC and take home field advantage, there probably weren't many people at all last year going into the season saying they would pick the Eagles to just run away with the NFC the way they did in the regular season. Right. So it's there for the taking. I'm excited to see how it all unfolds. But Lance, really appreciate you coming on, man. It's been a blast as always. As training camp goes on, I'm sure we'll do more of this, and I'm excited to chop it up with you. So overall, before we wrap up, confidence level in the Saints, is it a 10 or is it a 12? Where are we at on the scale?
I would say a 9. I would say a 9. We need. I'm 10 is kind of like as good as you can get. 12 is like, oh my gosh, this is blowing my mind. So I'm up there with a 9, but I need to see how we look early in the preseason, and even then, I mean, it's 2023 preseason, so there's not a whole lot of reps from the entirety of any unit. So, catch me early in the season, I'll be like, oh yeah, I was right. So we'll see.
I think we're all sitting here hoping you're right. If Saints get a home field advantage, it's going to be one heck of a season. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. As always, guys, make sure to subscribe to Boot Crew Media's YouTube page to get more content like this. We'll also be covering the Pelicans, LSU, Tulane, all of it here at Boot Crew Media. So make sure you don't miss it and stay tuned for more content here on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.